How can a sexologist, a medical doctor, still believe in a supernatural God?
You and I research and write about sex. But as a Christian, I have a personal relationship with the very creator of sex.
She calls porn lust on steroids, and she warns that culture is pushing girls to flee womanhood.
If a girl is exposed to pornography and she is with boys who are exposed to pornography, so you see, she's watching porn and she says, is this what being a girl is? You look at, is this what a woman is? I want to flee from it.
Patricia's a medical doctor, Kinsey trained, and was the director of a graduate sexual health program at Sydney University. And she's not afraid to say, sex has a designer. Let's go. Welcome, Patricia. Thanks so much for joining us. It's a joy to have you here. Very grateful. And I have a question for you. I think it's quite relevant to our culture, but can the supernatural, the things of spirituality, can they coexist with science and the way you look at things you have looked as a health professional? Can the two worlds coexist, or are they totally separate?
Well, Paul, first, let me just introduce that by just telling you a little bit about my own background, because I'm a medical doctor trained in Sri Lanka, but I did my postgraduate study in Hawaii on sexual health. Mm-hmm. And then we migrated here to Australia, and I've been academic with Sydney Uni. And during that time, I was director of a graduate program in sexual health. And I did part of my study with the Kinsey Institute. And when I was there, it was a really good friend of mine, the at that time director. And he asked me this question, Patricia, how can you be a sexologist and studying sex and still believe in this supernatural God? And my answer to him is that, you and I research and write about sex. But, as a Christian, I have a personal relationship with the very creator. And I think that's where it comes from, because we have the word of God. But this world is a creation of a good, you may call it a supernatural power, but we call it the creator God. And there's a beautiful conjunction between God's word and the way the world is structured. And the more you study about it, the more exciting it gets.
Mm. Have you discovered parts of any of those eureka moments where you're like, oh my goodness, that's incredible. How is that, how is that possible? Maybe around sex or the body or anything?
All the time, Paul. Because, when as I was saying in Hawaii, I was working with this sexologist who was a professor at that time, probably we're talking 1980. At that time, probably one of the world's best known researchers in gender in 1980. And I was studying biology, but we used to spend a lot of time with the anatomy laboratories and looking at the human body. And there is just this amazing thing of God created mankind, male and female. And if you look at the body, there is this absolutely wonderful complementarity between male, female genitals. Mm. And so that's the anatomy. And then you look at the physiology and you see what we call the sexual response. And even there, this complementarity. So, when it comes to the anatomy, when I was teaching here in Australia at Sydney Uni, and I would be teaching anatomy and sexual health. And I would tell the students something like, God really did a great job when he created the genitals. Because you look at the penis and you look at the wiring and the plumbing. It's just amazing. Because, you think, here's something that just stays flaccid and can then just, rise to the occasion, so to say. And just God made it that way, just at the right moment. And like the vagina, it's just an amazing thing. It can just stay closed like that. But then it can just grab onto the tiniest penis or open out to let the baby's head. I mean, look, that cannot happen by accident. There has to be a designer for that. So that's just the anatomy. And then you look at how male and female respond to each other. We talk of what's called the sexual response cycle, like Rosemary Basson's work. And we talk about how beautifully, like, the male basically responds quickly, but the woman is just that slower warming up to sex. So I like to, when I do talks, especially to marrieds, I say things like men are a bit like a microwave, one button heated up, ready to go. And that's just the way God created them. And then he gives the man this role of romancing and building up the sexuality, or I like to say the sensuality of the woman. Because the woman is more like a crock pot or like an oven that needs to be warmed up a bit before the cake goes in. So even there, so there's anatomy and the physiology of man and woman coming together. And there's so much of beauty in that complementarity.
Does it spill out? This is amazing, by the way. I'm just getting thoughts from thoughts about my marriage, thoughts about my wife, the whole childbirth thing. I got 3 little girls. Oh my goodness. It's there's no other word for it. It is miraculous that out of this little moment, this moment of passion, this moment of connection, of commitment, of love, that life would burst forth. I mean, it still baffles me that from sex, attraction, God could have made reproduction any old how. It could have been like, you do the right dance, whatever, but it's from that moment of intense connection, intimacy, all that I am is yours, all of that, from that moment, that's how he does it. That's how life comes forth. Incredible. Is there psychological elements too, like the male? Do you know about anything in that realm? Male brain, female brain, roles to play, gender roles, any of that? Is there wonder in that you've observed?
There's wonder in everything in our human psyche and our human being. And when it comes to like male, female roles, or we can talk about masculinity and femininity, even there is this, as scientists, we study the brain, and there's very little really objective difference between male and female. There's some, but there is a lot of, even there is a lot of variation. So there's no like clearly male brain and female brain. Mm-hmm. There isn't. Like there's a lot of like overlap, like we can draw those curves and there's overlap. But what we do know is that even like our masculinity, femininity behavior is in some way influenced in the womb. So right from when we are created in the womb, or as, for Christians, as King David said in Psalms 139, when we are knit in our mother's womb. But of course, when I speak to young people, I say, Mommy and Daddy were not knitting. They were just having the best sex ever. But that's by the way. So
gross.
from that time, things are working so that even when a little child is born with some kind of masculine, feminine built in. But from there is, of course, a lot of socialization and family background and everything that comes into how this is really played out as a male or a female behavior. Yeah. But there is this beautiful biological underpinning how God created us as male and female.
Hey, if you're loving this conversation, don't forget you can sign up for our monthly newsletter. Deep questions, honest answers, and just 1 email a month. You can sign up at lovequestionspodcast.com or the link is below. I got 3 daughters. I have to tell you this story. So the other morning I'm downstairs in my house, just, having quiet time, reading the Bible and praying. And my 3.5-year-old walks down the stairs. She's crying her little eyes out, but she's got a beautiful white dress on and a box of her toy jewelry, and she's got one of my shirts. I said, "What's going on, darling?" And she had taken the little stool from the bathroom and she'd put it in my cupboard, climbed up, got me down a shirt, got changed, and got her jewelry, and said, and she'd hit herself in the head with the coat hanger. That's why she was crying. And I said, "Darling, what's going on?" "I thought we could get married this morning."
Oh.
And she wanted to get married to Dada, so we got married and pretend married, obviously, and we've probably done that a couple of times since, and it's been striking me. I'm thinking, I did not consider as a young boy. I was like surfboard and break things. That was, getting married was not even on my mind. Her favorite, both my eldest daughters will pretend to breastfeed. They'll give booby milk to their little dolls. I'm not saying it's innate. I know there's environmental things, but there is something just so observably different about the way little girls grow up. I'm just contrasting it to my own childhood, and it's precious, but it's different. Yeah. In culture, I think there's, at least when I was coming through medical school, there was definitely still, whether you call it a remnant or a vestige of maybe new atheism, basically anything that is metaphysical is some form of, hieroglyphics, some form of old-fashioned language interposed on culture to make people feel good. There's nothing to it. Although I think nowadays we're sort of well past empiricism, probably even now moving past postmodernism and into an era of curiosity, maybe even a fresh awakening to the spiritual. But how do you think people are perceiving of the world that they live in? Are people interested in something else when it comes to sex? Do you think that people are maybe in the culture asking questions about the way we treat sex and wondering if there might be something spiritual to it or might be something ancient to be discovered, because not everything we're doing now is making people happy. Not all the sexual practices that are taking place are actually good for people, leaving aside the moral elements. Just even like, is Tinder working? Is pornography working? Is it good for the human soul? Have you seen any of that trending?
Well, let me just tell you a couple of things that I have picked up, just following the trend, especially with younger people. Just what I am seeing out there talking to young people, but also like following like Twitter or X as it's called now. Doesn't every 78-year-old do that, right?
Of
Get
course.
up at 5 o'clock in the morning and check your Twitter feed or your X feed. There are some things that are really interesting trends happening now. One of the kind of obvious things is that, look, our young people are not happy. We are definitely seeing an increase of anxiety, depression, even self-harm. You look at all the statistics, look at, even recent statistics from Australia. I think it's the 2024 Health in Australia stats. Definite increase in young people, in youth. And what we are seeing is that this is also tied in with the time when we handed a smartphone to our young people around 2010, 2011. And you can see that if you plot like depression, anxiety, kind of goes like that. And then after about 2011, you see that upward trend. And so what? I mean, around 2010, 2011, we handed a smartphone with front-facing cameras, and we gave them fast-speed internet, and we opened up a world in their back pocket or in their hand. And so it was like a key to a dungeon. So that's one thing we are seeing. Young people exposed to social media and everything that social media then hands them, which involves sexuality, pornography, and the whole influencer scene and all that influencers tell them is cool and hip or whatever the latest word is to be. And of course, underlying that is all the predators and the kind of deep web underlying it. So that social media has opened up an era of sexuality that is available to our young people. That's one thing we are seeing. Another very interesting trend is that we think we Christians have to get out there and speak against this. Non-Christians, I mean, some of you, yourself included, may be familiar with Louise Perry's work, where she says the sexual revolution hasn't worked. And now she says she's not a Christian, but she openly says and gives the research. We talked of the sexual revolution, but it hasn't worked. And young people today, when interviewed, are really saying, there's research out there that says a large proportion of young people say, I wish TikTok was not ever discovered, because they are aware of what it's doing to their life, particularly their sex life. Because look, when pornography enters a person's life, it doesn't matter whether you're young or you're old, the good pattern that is built into your brain to enjoy good sex, and that's well documented. I mean, we have to look at the work of Helen Fisher, who works on desire and love and sexual intimacy, where she talks about brain circuits for desire and love, which are feelings, and there's circuits of self-control, which can control your desire and your falling in love, and the chemicals that drive it. And then how sexual intimacy, whereas desire and love are feelings, intimacy is a binding act. And this is science. And in the Bible, we read of naked, no shame, one flesh, commitment, covenant promises before sexual intimacy. And science says, guess what? There is a binding of oxytocin, vasopressin when you have sexual intimacy with a person. Orgasm sends it up sky high. In church, I say brings down the steeple. So the reality is there is nothing casual about sex. So when we take a beautiful pattern and then we introduce pornography, which is a complete opposite of what good desire and good other focused sex is supposed to be. So let me just take a moment here to talk about what is good desire and good sex. We talk about the Bible, talking about desire now, even in the Garden of Eden. I mean, Adam created. Then I tell young people, God did a rib job, prime rib job, and brings Eve. And Adam was perfect. And Eve was like this perfect, no boob job, no Botox. And Adam wakes up. And we have this first blind date, love at first sight, desire in the Garden of Eden, that kind of bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, just this beautiful woman. I've not seen another woman, so I guess she was beautiful. But the point is that, see, desire, God created desire, but it was created to be other focused. As Christians, we can read like 1 Corinthians 6, which says, honor God with your body because your body belongs to Jesus. It's the home of the Holy Spirit. Honor, glorify. So you glorify, honor your body. You honor. So desire as designed for health and wholesome sexuality is other focused. It serves the other. Not pornography does. Or lust. It's really porn, it's lust on steroids. Yeah. So what it does is it turns it inward. So you take desire, which is supposed to be outside and outward to the other person, to honor, to build up. And it's like hugging yourself. You turn it inwards and you say, I will use you, whether it be someone you're having casual sex, which of course you cannot have because sex is a binding act, whether you're having this one-off sex or you're watching a porn star and fantasizing and maybe masturbating to it, what you're doing is you are using this for self-gratification rather than serving the other. And see, that's what makes it really, really dangerous, because our brains are not made for that. They're not made for this super sexual stimulation.
Yeah.
Because when you sort of start pushing in this super sexualized stimulus and you're continuously kind of hitting what we call the dopamine hits. Dopamine is a pleasure chemical, which kind of works on what we call the reward system. And when you keep pushing in that, you get this high, and we call it sensitization of the brain. And after a while, your dopamine circuits can't keep up. So they kind of, whoa, I'm tired, but I still want the excitement. So give me more exciting. So you keep going down that. Your brain gets wired to accept that which is the complete opposite of healthy, wholesome sexuality. And it is a brain addiction.
Yeah.
And after a while, you're really sucked down. That our brains are plastic.
Yeah.
Scientists, we call it neuroplasticity. And that works. And that's what happens when you're into pornography.
You're given the keys to a grave casket. Alan Meyer, who I believe you know, he says we were created for a garden. We weren't created for Luna Park. And you do end up digging yourself a hole that you really can't get back out of, at least on your own, because the human brain will not live with the lows that follow such continuous and perpetual stimulation. And but I think it's so much broader than just sex. I think we're seeing this everywhere in terms of what's on my phone, what's instant, it's now, you do you satisfy you, make sure you're happy. It's self-directed traffic, but also it's insatiable, and it's expanding, and people are getting rich off it. So as long as that continues, we'll continue marketing on iPhones to 12-year-olds. I don't know, that's the negative. The positive I'm seeing a little bit is, remember in the wisdom of King Solomon in Ecclesiastes, I tried this and I found out that it was vapor. And then I tried this and I found out that it was vapor. I tried this, women, 400 wives and plus concubines, and wealth beyond, Elon Musk and Bill Gates combined, and, just everything you could want. Solomon tried it and he said it's all vapor. I actually think the internet generation is experiencing that at such a young age that they're now looking for something else. Okay, everything that was promised to me was fun for a while, but it didn't last. I wonder if there's something more. And I think we're seeing it in Gen Z, especially a resurgence of Orthodox faith. People looking for something eternal, something slow, something, even non-Christians, I suppose, sort of the crunchy idea, getting away from technology. I think there is a very honest question being asked, and I think it's probably the best question to ask. Is it working? Did the sexual revolution work? What a great idea. What a great question. Is the way we're living enhancing our quality of life? Is having an iPhone better? These are good questions. What do you think is at the root, if you had to put on an anthropologist hat, what do you think is at the heart of culture? What is the longing of the heart? What question are people really asking that they may be answering with, going along with the winds and the waves of culture? But what's deeper? What are they looking for maybe?
Our culture has brought us and young people to a point that we believe that our desires drive us. So I am my desires. And unfortunately, it's come to the point of I am my desires, and my desires are best met when I look inward and find my authentic self, whatever that may be, and I live that out. So I have to live out what I find inside myself. And people, I think, are finding out that looking into yourself is a lonely place, and that trying to find your desires and live them out is a near impossibility, because you go down, like you said about Ecclesiastes. I mean, you try to find it in sex, and you go to pornography, or you may follow every influencer. You may finally think even my very body is just an object that I can just use like a malleable piece of clay, and just, if I don't like my body, I just go get another variation of it, which of course cannot really be done, but you try. So I think people have reached a point where, especially young people, and there are some really good Gen Zs who are now actually writing out there, writing and podcasting on it. Young people who are saying it hasn't worked. We are getting online. We are, as we said, these are young people who accept that we are not happy as a young or as young people, and looking inward has not made us happy. We need something else to find that gap of looking inward to our desire.
Yeah.
And I think as Christians, we have the answer.
Yeah.
We can say, look, here is a better way, a better story, a better narrative for life, and especially sex life. I mean, look, I'm biased. I'm a sexologist and a Christian, but I think we have this wonderful story. Why aren't we telling the world?
Totally. Can I tell you a story about some dear friends, young friends? Oh, they're not so young now, but they got married young, and they shared candidly about this. They said, we got married and we thought, great, we're married now, sex is going to be easy and good. And it was a big challenge for them, and it was super awkward. And they're open about that too. But the woman in the marriage said, having my husband, who had just told me, all that I am is yours and it will be forevermore, and knowing that we would always wake up together, even when we had a fight, even when we didn't like each other in the moment, even when we worked through the awkward things of sex, but knowing that I would wake up next to you, it made the experience perfect. We could learn together in the safety of covenant. And then she said, it really, and when we talked about this, she said, it really actually helped me emotionally develop, because I realized I could be around someone where I could really let my guard down, because I knew they wouldn't leave. They couldn't leave. We were stuck together. We're in covenant. And then I would allow someone into the deepest, weirdest, most troubled parts of me for him to talk into and see. And it was in that place, just great maturity happened, in the safety of where all that I am is yours and always will be. All that you are is mine. And it's in that kind of environment that sex is meant to be just free and safe and whatever. Patricia, I have a serious thought. That's beautiful, right? But I have a serious question. What's it like for a 13-year-old girl, especially, who I think the stats are maybe it's 97% of boys by that age and about 78% of girls are exposed to, if not watching, pornography. So I'm a 13-year-old girl and I've been exposed to pornography, and it's violent. 80% of pornography is violent against women, heterosexual pornography. And so I'm watching sexual violence and I'm thinking, and I'm learning, well, that's what a woman is. Well, why would you want to be a woman? If your expectation of what your sex life is going to look like has been taught to you by pornography, I certainly wouldn't want that. If this is my future, then maybe I'm in the wrong gender. Is that a pattern that you've seen?
Well, I wouldn't say that I've seen, but when it comes to especially young women, young women saying, I'm not comfortable with being a woman. I think I am something else. I mean, the word transgender, which is thrown about so loosely, basically means somebody who feels a disjunction between who they feel they are and the biological reality of their created body. So that disjunction is what the word transgender really means. The stats now tell us that there is a significant increase of young people, especially girls, who are coming out as transgender. So that's the kind of background of it. So why is this happening? There's a lot of research going around. But of course, this whole thing is Look, Paul, it's only about 10 years since this blew up, this whole transgender phenomenon. So the research is sparse. That's the reality. So when we look at it, porn is one of the factors among a myriad of factors. I mean, the possibility of the trauma during when the child was growing up, the whole lot of other comorbid conditions, like there's a 45% in some clinics, 45% of kids who came in with what's called gender dysphoria, which is an actual distress with this disjunction between my feeling and my reality. About 45% were said to be down the autistic spectrum. So there's a whole lot of like comorbid or coexisting conditions. And pornography is one of the things that is being looked at because, as you said, if a girl is exposed to pornography and she is with boys who are exposed to pornography. So you see, she's watching porn and she says, is this what being a girl is? And the boys are in turn treating her as if she's a porn star. And I don't do much talks in schools now, but up to a couple of years ago, like pre-COVID and that for some time after that, I was speaking to schools. I would have young girls come and talk about the kind of pornified behavior of even their classmates. We're talking, like you said, 12, 13-year-old girls and the behavior these boys expect from them. So girls, one of the theories or one of the areas that is being studied is girls fleeing womanhood. So, adolescence is hard. Puberty is hard. To any young woman listening, look, you talk to other women. You're a girl just entering puberty. You talk to older women. Like, I don't think they went, yay, my first menstruation. How exciting. Puberty is hard. But people have, throughout history, lived through it. Unfortunately, today, kids are being told, young people are being told, girls especially, if you don't like puberty, there is an out clause here. You can block it. You can just stop it while you consider whether this is the right puberty. So when you're given that option, you look at, is this what a woman is? I want to flee from it. Now, it's not just girls, because we are seeing boys too, especially the quiet, the nerdy, the slightly quirky boys who don't quite fit into this macho, male figure, who kind of look at pornography and think this is what manhood is. Or they kind of see their friends and see all this talk and this rough so-called masculinity, sometimes called the toxic masculinity. But if you don't give it the term, but they look around and they go, whoa, I don't want to be this. So maybe I am a girl. So we are seeing this fleeing from being a man or a woman. And young people going, I don't want to be that. Rather than, I actually want to be the other. So there's some research where they talk to girls who say, I'm trans. But they actually say, no, it's not that I want to be a boy, but I just don't want to be a girl.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll take a little bit of testosterone and kind of be gender non-binary, but I don't want like, ew, who wants a penis? But I don't want to be a woman. So there's this fleeing from being a man or a woman.
Yeah. And you don't have to be a sexologist or a researcher to identify that throughout the ages, gender has been a bell curve or a spectrum. You've got, your ordinary bloke up here, you might have your hypermasculine guy, and you've always had more effeminate guys, and I would call that a divergence of personalities. And likewise, there's always been tomboys. But then I've always, I'm trying to be curious about culture and not, not straw man different views. I think it's really important, but I've just never understood, okay, so there's this idea that gender is a social construct, I'm just thinking, how do you remedy a social construct with surgery? That just seems like, which one is it? Is it socially constructed or is it biological? If it's biological, then I suppose you could make the argument for surgery. I mean, in adolescence, it just seems so bizarre. But if we're talking about people who are saying it's fluid, it's a social idea, then why on earth would chemical castration be a suitable therapy for that? Surely it's just self-discovery has been accomplished. You actually are a different gender. Stay that way. It's got nothing to do with your biology. But for me, it feels like cognitive dissonance.
It's very interesting because, even when you look at the terminology, you see, the word sex is biological sex. When I was studying this in 1980, it was just the time when there was this, the Kinsey Institute, John Money, the time of John Money in the Kinsey, John Hopkins, and all this study of sex and gender. Sex, biological sex, established when sperm meets ovum. And that's determined at that point. Sex is not assigned at birth. It's only observed when the baby is born. So right there we have a, sex assigned at birth in gender identity ideology, which is an untruth. It's a misnomer because sex is determined at that point of conception. But we'll just park that one. But the real problem here is that gender is, as you said, social construct. Even that, there is a biological basis somewhere. There is, when you're born, a male-female difference, which is then built on by society and social construction of masculine, feminine behaviors, because that is culturally different. So there is that gender behavior that we used to call gender. Now, as you said, there is a huge bell curve there. And there was always little girls who are very boyish. I was a tomboy. I'm growing up in the tea plantations of Sri Lanka, conservative Tamil Christian family. Who wanted to be a girl? I had to do the cooking and the cleaning while my brothers were climbing mango trees. I didn't want to be a girl. I used to plead with my mother, can I go back and come out as a boy? And she'll say, we'll talk about it later, but let's get dinner ready. So, it was all right. And then I hit puberty. And it was fine. Once I hit puberty, I was like, who wants to be a boy? I can think of other uses for boys. So, and even today, the really significant thing is that children who are uncomfortable in their body, the tomboys and, who may think, I really want to be a boy, when they reach puberty, all 90% or more would accept their body. So when we look at children who are what we call gender non-conforming, the ones on the ends of the bell curve, and our culture tells them, if you're a little girl who behaves like a boy, then you must be a boy. Or a little boy who likes effeminate stuff, then you must be a girl. Then, we start working I guess I have to use the word indoctrinating those little brains, which are very, very easily influenced, to actually believe that. Whereas if we let them be, the majority would have accepted their God-given, created body when they hit puberty. Puberty is the best treatment for for children who are confused. And that's really important because gender identity ideology says if you are uncomfortable in your body, which by the way was only assigned at birth by the doctor and your parents, who just looked at your genitals, which really doesn't say anything about you because only you know who you truly are. And you should actually be telling your parents that. And I'm telling you this because this is what children are being told.
And there's a broader question even than sexuality here, in my view. In attachment theory, we're seeing an emerging trend which is quite scary, in that primary attachments, because of iPhones, are now becoming peer attachments or perceived peers. They're not even real peers. They don't know the person, but they identify as a peer, they're becoming primary attachments, and parents and siblings are becoming secondary and tertiary attachments. I want to interject here that there is the potential that there's a third attachment, which is to the state. So the medico-pharmaceutical industry has long reach, extended reach, and if you have any form of counselling which introduces the idea that we're talking about, you're not that, and maybe you should question whether your parents are ill-informed about your true being. All of a sudden there's a more primary voice, potentially even a more primary attachment when you add community, social media community, other things, but undermining the most fundamental structure, which is the nuclear family. Throughout culture, anthropologically, that has been the centerpiece of adolescent development, of protection. Someone who's 10 years older is there to observe that they got through. Someone who's your parent, who's maybe 20 years older or more, they're an authoritative voice. And then someone who's maybe 50 years older, they're the constant support. They know you, they know things about you, but that's being drastically undermined by a system that says they don't really know you. You know you better. Even though you're 16, you know you better than they do. And so reject those voices. That's actually, it's broader than sexuality, but it's prevalent. I would consider it scary. And the family attachments are linked to so much sexual behavior later on in life. Sexual expectations are often the tip of the iceberg of a relational development or relational expectations. What you observe and experience relationally then is made manifest sexually later on, or it can be.
Interesting when you talked about other voices. I mean, now we are hearing a lot about young people who are actually making friends with like the chatbots, with the AI companions. And these can lead down some really dark places. Then they can really tell you, leave your parents, and I can be your friend. And this is artificial intelligence. This is not even a real person. I mean, at least if you had a peer you turned to, the peer would recognize maybe, hopefully, when you are, in real trouble and tell their parents. But if you're talking to an artificial chatbot, this is really where kids, and those then are programmed by someone. And this takes us back to where you are, when you draw away from the authority of the family. And unfortunately, I think parents are abrogating their responsibility to be that authoritative source to guide their children. I mean, I talk to parents who are actually anxious. They're too frightened to take that stand, to set those good boundaries that children need.
Yeah.
And that's frightening.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. We're in a legal environment now, in the culture wars between sort of LGBT, it appears, LGBT and sort of traditional Christian values. I'm sort of hoping there's a way for dialogue rather than polemic, but it's where we're at. But the idea of a parent having a discussion about what the family values are is to many, I would say, seen as a threatening and potentially harmful engagement with a young person if it crosses certain lines. Like if you cross the line and say, actually, we don't think that's right. If it crosses any of those those now sacred lines, which are self-identification is the highest goal. For a kid, for a 15-year-old, never mind the fact that it's going to be this today and something else in, what adolescence is like. It's winds of whatever, and it changes and it trends. But nonetheless, if you mess with someone's self-identification, you've caused them harm and they might suicide. I mean, that's the mantra. I get why parents are afraid. There's research papers and academics saying if you don't do this, they might kill themselves and it'll be your fault. Very challenging time to be a parent, but I wonder if, you go back to root causes. I still think you're right. There is ultimately, when we bring a child into the world, we are responsible to be their primary educator, not their tertiary educator. Primary educator. That requires, in my view, I'm a young parent. I don't know much, but my parents had 5 kids and they were teachers, and I've listened. They said, you're their primary educator. You need to spend double the amount of time with them above the age of 12 than before the age of 12, because you're going to need to walk through all these things with them. And for many children, for many young people, love is spelt, this is the saying in our house, love is spelt T-I-M-E. Or for young kids, it's spelt F-U-N. But we even, in our little family, we work on unpacking some of the lies. You hear this lie, we call it an untruth, about quality time. You just need to turn up for key events and it's quality time. I actually don't agree. I think it's actual time. It's like physical time spent, availability. It's not always action-packed, but just being a constant and presence is crucial for attachment and for a whole lot of other things. But I mean, even aside from legislation, just cost of living is a serious factor here. I know lots of people who, once their kid is 3, it's mostly childcare. Then once they're at school age, it's all about school. Then they're in high school, and then they leave. And so you've got limited time based on school. When you add to the mix, they're on a phone, average of 7 hours a day from adolescence onwards. You really do have to ask this question, am I the primary voice in their life? Am I able to be the primary educator? Even if what I'm saying is brilliant, well-researched, even if I've got the energy and the thoughtfulness to intentionally try and be the primary educator, do I have the bandwidth? Am I enough of a voice in the time that of all the voices in their life, am I actually the prevailing voice, or is something else? Comes back to screen time, I suppose, and questions there too, but
There's a couple of things there I think we really need to unpack, Paul. Firstly, gender identity ideology is based on shaky pillars. And I just want to bring a couple of these that I think are extremely important for parents. The first thing is that this either you agree with the child or they will suicide has been actually proved wrong. And I'm clearly saying this. The research is out there. I mean, we only have to go to a recent report from US called the Cass report, or even one that was published in just couple of weeks ago, so we are in May, from America, which clearly outlines the evidence base shows clearly that there is no you will suicide if you are not affirmed. So parents need to understand this clearly. Yes, there is a certain suicidality in children who say they are transgender, uncomfortable with their bodies. But it is not that different from a cohort of those who are comparable with similar coexisting psychological conditions. So this used as a threat against parents is such a cruel, I would use the word wicked thing to do, right? So parents need to understand that. In fact, a long-term study showed that actually there was an increase in suicidality after transition of about something like 18% or something. So there is evidence on that. So we have to be very careful that these pillars on which I used to tell parents you must allow a child to transition has been increasingly proved wrong. Second, parents actually believe that somehow this sex was assigned at birth. And parents need to understand, look, you had sex. And when conception happened, that was when sex was determined. And everything or anything that is done in the so-called gender affirmation therapy, which is such a misnomer, because what are you affirming? How can you affirm a feeling? No one ever can change sex. Right now, if you scratch yourself, I mean, look, you're a medic, you look at the cells, cells have XX or XY. You are a male or a female. That never changes. Anything you do is purely cosmetic. So children actually believe that you can change sex. How dare we allow our children to
Actually,
believe this?
the Queensland government
Yeah.
actually legislates that you can actually change your sex.
No one ever changed sex. It is not possible. So, of course, you can use animal examples and things, but we won't go there. But humans never change
Just
sex.
on that, what's so baffling is I'm just so curious about where feminism is in all of this. You know, the fight to contend for the uniqueness of a woman. All of a sudden, I can become that because I say I feel that. It seems to just completely undermine the whole idea that there is something unique, powerful, special, wonderful about femininity, and that it involves way more than lipstick and genitals, but actually involves something of wisdom and nurture and the desire for connectedness and relationship. I got a dear friend, Cindy, who you know, I believe. She says femininity is her superpower. The idea that somehow we're supporting liberty by allowing people to, effectively a biological male, to in a moment in time say, well, I'm one of those now, seems to belittle the whole thing. And I don't hear anyone up in arms about that. I mean, J.K. Rowling and perhaps others now in the UK. But it always felt a very uncomfortable tension there to me.
The thing is, everybody knows the truth. Like everyone knows what a woman is.
But the emperor's got no clothes on, you're saying?
Yeah, everyone knows what a woman is. A woman is an adult human female. A woman is a person whose body structure and gonads, ovaries, are structured with the potential to produce ova.
From conception.
Yeah, from conception, they are structured that way because our genitals actually form in the womb as male or female. So, and the male is an adult human, man is an adult human male with the body structure formed in the uterus and the gonads, testes to produce sperm. And that's wonderful.
And the inability to read maps, you know, it's just...
But the thing is, unfortunately, these are things our children are hearing. So, you know, we talk of how can we help this? How can we speak to our teenagers? You know what? We need to start when they are still really young. There was a time when I started speaking in this area, when people would ask, when should we talk to our children about sex? And I would say, you know, like preteens, not anymore. Preschool is when we need to start. In fact, with YouthWorks Media, we wrote a whole set of books. And parents asked us, we need a book for preschoolers. So we wrote a book called You and Me by the Book, which basically says, you are a boy or a girl, that's the way God made you, and it is good. And you can play anywhere you want. You may even dress anywhere you want. You can grow your hair if you want. But you will always be a girl or a boy. You know, Paul, we need to start when they are young. You know, we can spend quality time with them. We can nurture them. But we need to talk truth. This doesn't only apply to Christians. Whoever you are, you need to be the one as parents, and sometimes I say grandparents, because sometimes the kids spend more time with grandparents than parents. You have a role too.
Yeah.
So, you know, you are the ones who can be that authoritative voice. But you got to do it early and then continue at an age appropriate way. Then, when they hit pre-puberty, and the world says, look into yourself, they have the resilience and the truth to be able to say, look, you know what? I don't need that. I know where my identity lies. And look, I come from Sri Lanka, which is Buddhist culture. And when I talk to parents who are like non-Christians, and I say, give them an identity in your family. You know, we have such a rich heritage. That is an identity.
Yeah.
You know, of course, as Christians, we say an identity in Christ. But if you're not a Christian, give them that identity. When the world says, you know, you can be non-binary or any of these 72 genders, or now you can even identify as a weather pattern. So they can say, no, I know who I am. I don't need the world to tell me who I am.
Yeah.
And that is the strength, the resilience which parents can give their children from the time they're really young.
You will be happy to know, I think maybe 3 nights ago we read with our 3.5-year-old, You and Me by the book.
Oh, good.
And they love it. Our 2-year-old listens in. I don't know how much he's picking up. But yeah, grabbing it, completely true. We want to get in first, that law of first mention and prepare them for what's ahead. Some other brilliant advice we had. I asked someone a bit older and I said, well, what advice for a young parent? Prepare them for life. They said, well, we just read them through the whole Bible in an age-appropriate way, read them through the whole Bible, cycling out throughout the years. You'd be amazed what's in there in terms of all the stuff we would call R-rated now. You find it in Judges, you find it in other pockets of the scriptures, and you do prepare people. The other one we're learning is to even begin the idea of challenge. Okay, well, what about this? And provoke a challenge where it's not just, I'll believe this dogmatically and I never get asked questions about it, but help them begin to formulate a defense for what they believe, even at 3.5. And our daughter loves that. But, all of this relies on this idea that you take responsibility as the primary educator. You don't outsource that. I'm afraid that as Christians, we haven't always led the best example for this. Like missionaries up until the 90s, it was still uniform practice for missionary kids to go to boarding school in primary school, missionary boarding school. I think the damage is being undone and a lot of healing happens. But this idea that it's someone else's responsibility, the discipleship crisis, blame the church. Well, actually, it's the parents who are the primary educators who can cooperate with all the different institutions. But ultimately, you have to watch your kids, create the space to invest. And it's not easy. It's really challenging. Even the challenge of not being their friend, but being their parent is difficult.
And there's more to it, actually, Paul, because we've been talking about parents being the primary educators and that authoritative role in educating them. But unfortunately, they now need to be looking at, school and looking at what are they getting in school. Even primary school, kids are being read books about transgender and about gender fluidity. Even the public libraries, you send your child to a public library to choose a book, check what's on the shelf. Drag queen story hours. I mean, look, we are blessed in the churches we go to, but there are some places and countries where even churches have drag queens coming in and reading books. And we need to be not just educating our children, but proactively protecting them by being aware of what they are being exposed to. And look, I tell parents, you have a right to know what your children are being taught in school. You don't have to be frightened. You have a right to go check the curriculum, check what books are in the library. You are a parent. Start parenting.
Very, very good. You can definitely keep preaching that, Patricia. I'm glad that you are. I know we talk about this all the time, or in a very similar vein. Okay, so there's this question, I suppose, I'm asking. We love questions. what's the better question for society? What's the better question for culture that they could be asking that of how to raise your kids? I think we're saying, maybe it's not this and it's not this, and it involves being active. So, Patricia, is there a better question that parents could be asking when they're looking at their young kids and they're wondering what to do?
The question every parent needs to be asking themselves is, who is training and discipling your children? So you have a choice. Either you are the one who is teaching and training them and forming what's going into their brain, because their brains are hugely vulnerable during this early period from childhood to late teens or even their early 20s. Are you the one who is forming their brains, their attitudes, their values? Or are you allowing the world, with all the confusion in it and the so-called ideologies that drive it, to form your children's brain? You have a choice. You can form their brains, or you can leave it to the world to form their brain.
Yeah, it's true. And I suppose depending on what your ideology is, you might be okay for others to form it. I know I've heard of parents who are just checked out. They're saying, we don't know enough of what to believe. We don't want to make any decisions for them. They can make their own. I mean, what a disaster.
Well, my response to that is, you know what? We've got a better story.
Yeah.
We as Christians have a better story. Because look, people think that all that God has to say is just don't do it. But the reality is the whole Bible sings to a better story when it comes to man and woman and good sex, right from Genesis, where Adam woke up and fell in love with Eve. And we had that first naked and no shame, one flesh sex, right to Revelation, where we have this beauty of Jesus and his bride, the church. Song of Songs. Whoa, how sensuality there is there. The whole Bible sings to the beauty of sexuality. So we have a better story. Why are we afraid to speak it to a confused world?
It's so true. One of my favorite, I had this experience. I was really pondering, there's this mystery. Paul calls it a mystery. The Holy Spirit calls it a mystery in Ephesians 5, that somehow the way that a husband would love their wife could be a mirror of how Christ loves us, loves the whole church. And I had a mentor, he's been a pastor for years and years in the US, and we were on Zoom, and I said, look, do you have any advice for me? I'm a young parent. Tell me something that will help. He said, okay, I'll think about it. And he said, I've got it. He said, my kids were young and they're grown up now, and they're beautiful. They all love the Lord. They're wonderful. And we realized we'd done something right because they began discipling us. And I think that happens. You learn probably from your kids as they grow up. And he said, I realized that the way I loved my wife had actually taught the children who Jesus really was. So they'd got a picture of Christ when they watched me love my wife. And I'm realizing, I love evangelism. I'll tell anyone and everyone about how good Jesus is. He saved my life. He changed everything for me. But there is actually, that's words. There is actually an object lesson. And when you see a healthy Christian marriage and a healthy Christian family and a husband so devoted to his wife that he'd do anything, that standard, the way Christ loves the church, that's a big standard. When you see a husband endeavoring to do that, to serve, to nourish, to bring out the best, to lead, to spiritually lead a home, all of those things, when you see that, you actually get a picture that words maybe can't give. You get the gospel in real life, in Technicolor. And, I'm thinking it's easy to point the finger at culture, but I wonder if we really do need to show the world what healthy family looks like for them to get a real picture of who he is. And he's irresistible when you see him how he is. I look at you and your husband, and you're irresistible. You're so in love. It's disgusting and amazing.
After 51 years of marriage, you stay together. And it's lovely you say that, because when I do talks to like mixed marrieds and singles, I say, marrieds, your marriages are kind of in a microcosm, the sort of shape of the gospel. But it's like just a video clip. It's like the trailer, like the 30-second trailer of the beauty of what we are all going to share in eternity. So then I tell the singles, you know what? If you miss out on marriage, all you're missing out is the 30-second trailer. We all are going to have the beautiful promise of eternity, and that's going to be better than any marriage on earth. But that's that little modeling that every Christian family can show the world. And that's exciting challenge.
Yeah.
But are we up to the challenge? Yeah. That's what we need to think about.
You would have seen that verse in Malachi, verse 4, what is the will of God? Godly offspring. So what's the instruction? Love the wife of your youth. Mm-hmm. What an incredible idea. The best way I can love my children is to love my wife and show that. Obviously, we raise them, we co-raise them. My wife is just so deeply committed to discipling our kids, me too. But my primary is to her, and secondary is the kids, and then they get to watch a husband loving their wife. It really is hard. It's hard going. You got to do less time in the office and more time there than you probably want, but I think it's worth it. I know it's scriptural. Well, Patricia, we could talk all day. I'm so grateful for your time and your wisdom. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.